This is Not Now, Maybe Later, a teen mental health podcast and a project of Sweetser. I'm glad you're listening, so let's get started. Hello, podcast listeners. Welcome to this episode of Not Now, Maybe Later. This is the final episode of our first season, so thank you so much to those of you who have listened through all the episodes that I've posted in this season. This is the 8th episode, and because this is the June one, we are going to talk all about LGBTQ plus mental health. I was really excited to find a guest that you'll hear the interview of from OUT Maine, which is a youth organization in Maine that focuses on queer celebration, mental health services, and you'll get to hear so much about that from my guest. And before we get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we focus specifically on queer youth. So according to the Trevor Project's very large research study done in 2022, 45% of LGBTQ plus youth considered suicide in the previous year. And of those, half were ages 13 to 17. That is a stat that should not be ignored. Another stat, 60% of LGBTQ plus youth who wanted mental health care were not able to get it in the time that this study was done. And I want to talk a little bit about the reasons why that mental health care didn't happen. Also, LGBT teens are 6 times more likely to experience symptoms of depression and twice as likely to be suicidal. So it's super important we do not overlook that there are some teens who really are struggling in a way that relates very much to who they are and how people have treated them.
Hi, my name is Brittany, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Maine. While Emily is an awesome therapist, this podcast is for your enjoyment, and it is not therapy. If you're struggling or you need help right now, tell someone in your real life. If you live in Maine and are in crisis, call or text the Maine statewide crisis hotline at 1-888-568-1112 or text HOME to 741741. Don't wait. Get help now.
In particular, too, there is a lack of mental health support that really understands the culture for youth of color who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or other identities. So let's talk about some of the reasons why getting help can be harder if you identify as LGBTQ+. These questions were asked of a very large sample of teens, and some of the things that came up as really significant were having to go to a therapist or go to a program and talk about their mental health concerns. That felt scary and vulnerable, and something that was kind of stopping them from asking or stopping them from saying yes when they were offered services. Another reason some queer youth did not get mental health care was concern about having their parents have to consent. We've talked about parent consent in other episodes, but the bottom line is it's very, very hard to access therapy or other mental health services without the parent giving consent. Other teens who answered these questions said they were afraid that they wouldn't be taken seriously in mental health care, being dismissed as just quote unquote going through a phase or not knowing who they are. And like anyone accessing mental health care, there were concerns about whether it would be affordable, about whether therapy will quote unquote work. And then for queer youth in particular, they were afraid that going to therapy or identifying as needing services would be a way that they would be outed, or that their therapist may not be well informed about LGBTQ specific needs, and therefore when they went to therapy, their identity would not be understood. And again, like anyone trying to get to an appointment, for some people, therapy was inaccessible because they couldn't get a ride. Let's talk for a second about specific sort of trends that would affect mental health for teens, and in particular for LGBTQ plus teens. Well, we've talked before on this show about how COVID affected teens in general, about how much that was isolating, about how much less you got to spend time with people that felt like supports. And it definitely caused the downward trend that we're still seeing for mental health when you're a teenager. And then specifically for queer youth, we're dealing with a big backlash, I guess, in the United States against specifically transgendered folks. There's anti-transgender legislation being presented in a number of states for a number of reasons, and this is really targeting gender-affirming care, targeting bathroom access, targeting whether or not a transgendered individual can play a sport. And so this is really causing many transgendered teens to have greater mental health struggles. I wanted to make sure I touched base about resources available that are more queer friendly, more queer informed. There are great resources on a webpage. They may have an app too called Trevor Space. It's part of the Trevor Project. And also there's a really sweet show on YouTube called The Assignment. It's run by the It Gets Better Project, and it really is queer-centric, really focusing on queer businesses, queer young people, all sort of within the community. And if a queer teen is looking to access care, you can text 678-678 to get support from someone within the LGBTQ plus community.
Yay!
So let me turn it over to let you listen to the interview. This is Maura. She's the mental health coordinator for OUT Maine, and we had a chance to get together and record for these podcasts. They also have a great podcast called Thinking Out Loud. So check that one out too. She should be posting an interview with me so you can hear what kind of questions she had about teen mental health. And here you go. Have a listen. Well, I am happy to have this guest here with me today. We're getting ready to celebrate Pride Month this month, and I couldn't hope for a better guest than someone coming from OUT Maine. So, Maura, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Maura Oakes. I'm an LCPC in the state of Maine. I'm also OUT Maine's mental health coordinator. I've been in this role for a little bit, and prior to that was our youth engagement coordinator, so bopping around some different positions within OUT Maine, but really excited to be here chatting with you today.
Yes, and I found you because you have a podcast too. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so OUT Maine is trying really hard to get this podcast off the ground. It's called Thinking Out Loud, and essentially it is used for supporting parents and youth and providers, and in any way we can to just help them stay informed and let them ask questions and feel supported by LGBTQ plus topics and discussion and all the things that might involve, being a parent to someone in the community and just ways that they can help support the best they can.
Awesome. So you're guesting on mine because this episode is really focused on queer youth, and all of my episodes are about mental health. So we're going to try to meet each other there, where working with OUT Maine gets us to the parts of the mental health work that you're doing, and then just all the great activities that you can tell everybody about so they know that there's plenty to do in Maine when you're queer.
Yeah, and I think I love OUT Maine for this reason because we try so hard to branch out all over the state. So it never feels like we're just in the mid-coast where we're based out of. We can go down to southern Maine. We can be all the way up in Aroostook County, which is a really crazy span of geographical space. So we definitely have lots going on all the time.
Yes. And my hope for this podcast, for Not Now, Maybe Later, is I want to hope that teens in Maine are listening, though obviously a lot of the things we talk about could apply to anyone, anywhere. I think we just need to own that this is where we are, and this is the geography of our state, and also the ruralness of our state, which I'm sure can have an effect on mental health in a different way.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about this ruralness in Maine, because for a long time we were having in-person drop-ins pre-pandemic, and we were like, hey, if you're in the Rockland, Maine area, come sit in this big conference room with us and hang and talk and have good conversation, meet great people. But the problem became that no one was leaving their houses, and then now we're realizing that our youth that come to our weekly youth groups are all over the state, and there's no way that there's actually a lot of unlikelihood that these youth will ever actually meet in person. And so using online platforms has been huge. I just think rural Maine is going to benefit so much by the continuation of online platforms, and it kind of poses a thought about how Discord and all of these online apps for youth are super popular, and it's because it's connecting them all over the state or all over the world, which is really cool.
Yes, and I haven't gotten through an episode without someone talking about social media and how that connects people to one another, but also the ups and downs. So maybe we'll end up dropping a few points on that when we talk.
Yeah, I'm sure.
All right, so let's start from you getting to talk about working with teens and being a mental health provider. So in your sphere, what would you say are some of the biggest conversations, topics, issues that you see the youth you're working with talking about as far as mental health?
Bullying. Bullying is one of like the top concerns. There's kids at school that just don't understand them. There's teachers at school that are misgendering them. And while that's, I wouldn't say a form of bullying intentionally by any means, there's a lot of unintentional bullying happening as well. And so kids are really concerned. They're saying, hey, like, what am I doing to stop this? I've talked to this person. I talked to the principal. I wrote a letter to the superintendent. Like, what else can I do to kind of help myself? Or they've not done any of those things because they just feel so defeated. So in terms of what's taking a toll on their mental health, it's really like this big bullying aspect, which is common for everyone. This isn't just an LGBTQ plus issue, but now you add this secondary layer of being a part of a community that is very misunderstood. And, it's a lot. It's chaotic and it's confusing for folks in the community and outside. Like, people just don't get it. So bullying is definitely one of those big topics. But I also think that the ability to read books and see people like them, like the exposure to the accessibility to read books about, same-sex couples, or, to have teachers be out in school and be like, wow, that's a role model for me because they came out and, they're thriving. Those are other big conversations that we're having.
And I was thinking when you brought up bullying first, which makes a ton of sense. I've gone in the course of this year and this podcast, when I started, I was working at one high school. So I had a very good look at what was going on as far as bullying and sort of identity in general at that one school. And since then, I've branched out to working with teens from different school districts. And I'm finding, and I don't know if this is true for you since you're talking to teens from all over Maine, it can vary by where you are. And I'm not even saying it's like north to south or big towns to little towns. I've been really surprised to find out, meet somebody, talk to them, then hear about their school, then find out what school it is. And I was like, okay, so that sucks. Like, that school's not doing a very good job and maybe a worse job than another school is in handling this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, typically you see southern parts of Maine feel a bit more understanding and a bit more accepting. However, that is not like a golden rule by any means. And so it's actually confusing to me because some months I'll see schools thriving and doing so well with their Gay Straight Trans Alliance programming and their support in their school. The schools will reach out for training and we'll go in and we'll give them these full student or teacher and faculty trainings that are absolutely wonderful and everyone's engaged. And then 2 weeks later, there's a huge incident that happens that's, causing severe decrease in mental health and sometimes unfortunately can lead to something like suicide or something really, really tragic. And so it's very confusing to see these ups and downs. And so I don't even, like you said, it's not even geographic. It's not big town, little town. It's depends on the month and the atmosphere and what that, community looks like in that town at that moment. It's just one little thing that could set it off potentially.
Absolutely. The other thing I was thinking about with bullying when you said it is, so there's layers, right? Because you're bringing up a very important issue about being a GLBTQ teen and bullying about your sexual orientation. There's bullying about mental health mental health, right? So I can't imagine walking through a school and feeling like you're wearing one identity people already know, but you're trying to hide another one. Could go either way. You know, you're not minding people know that you're anxious, or you have depression, but you aren't ready for everyone to know what your sexual orientation is. And then if you're picked on for one or both of those, it's a heavy walk.
Yeah, the intersectionality between all of the things that could go wrong or could be different about a person are tragic. And so there's the race, the ethnicity, the gender identity, sexual orientation. Mental health stigma is already huge. And, you know, while we work so hard to shrink that, you know, it's multifaceted in so many ways, and the layers seem to kind of never stop, it feels like. It's always like building blocks stacked one on top of another. But yeah, it can set fire to, like, you know, inside someone when they're like, oh my gosh, I've been made fun of for every part of who I am and all the things that I have to deal with. So, like, now what?
Yep. And on the flip side, so we don't make this the most depressing episode ever, I think any one of those is a way to relate to someone else too. So I know for, you know, I'm hoping for most every young person, like, there's a connection because you can understand something about another person in a really personal way, whether it's how they identify on any of the things. And so those could be building blocks that could topple when people are kind of picking on you for it, but they also could be like cement underneath you, because now, like, you are a part of the queer community, or you do let people know that you've struggled with depression, and that's gonna connect you. And I think I've noticed, all in all, like, people find their people even if they don't know these things. Like, you have a friend and you're just attracted to get to know them, and then you find out, oh, you're also queer, or your parents, you know, raised you in this way that I also have had to deal with.
No, you're 100% right in all of that. I think it's really easy for us to jump to the negatives because we see so much in the media, we see so much in the, you know, everywhere on just on every platform. It feels like that's so negative. But the truth behind it is there's several people that are in the LGBTQ plus community that have, or that struggle with mental health, that are doing really well given, you know, all of those things. And so, like I said, it's easy to focus on some of those negatives, but really there is like this cement but kind of platform built for like support to say like, hey, I'm grounded in who I am, you know, and who supports me and who loves me and who cares about me. And those things build me up too. So having things like a gay, straight, trans alliance, or sometimes people call them civil rights clubs in schools, we know that's a huge protective factor for mental health and, you know, keeping kids in school, keeping kids in their homes with, you know, parents or guardians, and not ending up homeless. And all these things are really big support factors to keep them going. And so when schools do those things and have really great programming after school, or they get weekend things going on with their group, or just meet like-minded individuals, we see them thrive all the time when they're in a community of accepting folks. And it's really, really awesome to see.
We're going to talk real soon about what some of the things OUT is doing to connect people.
Perfect.
All right, we were going to get a chance, because I love on my podcast to introduce people to new things, or at least maybe accidentally talk about really popular things, even if I didn't know it. So you and I, we're going to talk about a few things that are trending right now. I mean, right now, let's say in 2023, because obviously, like, maybe someone's listening right when this episode comes out, and maybe they're not. So at this moment in time, what are some of the like trendiest things happening with queer youth?
So one of the things I've seen a lot of youth be talking about is kind of about this like astrological connection with, I mean, the earth and the environment and themselves, and really finding that astrology is resonating with them in a way that makes them confident in their identity.
Will you tell us what astrology is, just in case that's not what people are saying?
Yeah, sure. So astrology in terms of like, I'm thinking like astrological signs. So, and I'm not like a professional in astrological
you have no tarot cards
anything.
with you.
Yeah, no, I am definitely not. I mean, I know I'm a Sagittarius, and all in my mind that just means like I have this fiery, sassy personality, and as a Sagittarius, like I'm stubborn and I do all these other things. For other people, their signs, they come with a list of characteristics. They give you insight about how you might react to things and what your best love interaction is and how you get along in conversation and how you get along like intellectually with people. And I think that it almost strips away that labeling of, I was assigned female at birth, so I should like someone assigned male at birth, and we should have like a heterosexual relationship. It kind of takes it away to be like, well, let's talk about just the person. Like, who is the person? What is it about them that you might be attracted to? And, how you can make that work. And it's, I don't know, it just like strips back all of those like really heavily labeled terms. And I think that's why youth are feeling like they connect with it more, because it makes more sense, because it's exactly how they feel inside, which is awesome.
And that it just occurred to me, your astrological sign is something you're born with. Like, you can't, I guess you could like reject your birth astrological sign and be like, I know I was born a Cancer, but I'm a Pisces, and everyone is going to treat me as if I'm a Pisces. But really, it's like, it's the moment that you were put on this planet. That's what your astrological chart is. So that's a nice way for people to like go back to looking at a pretty potentially core part of themselves that they can just decide if they want to own it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And astrological signs have nothing to do with what you look like, with the parts you were born with, none of that. It talks about where on the earth you were, when you were born, and then the time.
Yep.
Like, that is specifically what we're basing all of this off of. And the idea is really cool, and I know that not everyone is into astrology, and you can take it or leave it. Yeah. That's absolutely your prerogative, but I think it's cool to explore into it if you have been considering like other options in terms of like your sexual identity or gender identity and sexual orientation or all of these things. I think it's just a fun little introspective thing to do.
Yep. And mental health wise, it's really nice to discover something new that feels positive. So I like the idea. Like, I'd want to assign it as homework if someone is just like, I could see like someone being asked questions, all the demographic questions. I mean, we don't ask anyone their astrological sign when they show up for an appointment. So I think that's kind of like, it could open up a new thing to think about for a little while. And then maybe you're like, this absolutely is, hogwash. Like,
100%. I think when I applied to OUT Maine, they asked me my astrological sign. I'm not gonna lie.
Then that's why you work there. You're like, this is a cool
and I
interview.
think the other thing when you ask about being on a team, like whether you're a golden retriever or a beaver, or it has to do with like the cat, like some category of like some number assignment, like probably like a personality assessment, because you can't only have so many golden retrievers on staff. I mean, in life you can have a lot, but you can't, on staff. You don't need people that focus.
Golden retrievers are like the nicest.
They are, but they're like kind of like distractible.
High needs, maybe.
But right, like I think I was more of a beaver, meaning like I was like getting down to business, like I'm taking care of it. My very type A personality. So who knows?
Wow.
So maybe that's going to be popular next. We don't know.
I'd really like everyone listening to recognize that you never know what's going to happen at a job interview. Like, what questions they might ask.
Oh, yeah. Whenever I interview anyone to do anything with OUT Maine, I like to ask them what part of a bicycle they would be. Oh. Because I want to know why, too. So
that's a cool question.
So keep that one in mind. You could use that as like a fun icebreaker anywhere, but I always like to ask, like, are you the seat? Are you the handlebars? Are you the brakes? Yeah. Are you the chain that keeps everyone together? Like, where do you fall? And so it gives you a lot of opportunity to talk about yourself in a really positive way that's like mostly silly, but also really true to who you are. So
yes, totally stealing that.
Absolutely.
Actually, if anyone actually ever comments on this podcast, they can go ahead and say that in the comments. What part of the bicycle are you?
Absolutely. I would love that.
Oh, okay. One more part that I think we should talk about is what's going on in media. What are the sort of things people are watching to get to see something related to their sexual orientation or being a teenager?
Yeah, one of the latest crazes, and maybe I'm a little outdated now because, you know, I'm not, you know, 15, 16 years old, but, you know, one of the shows that I watched recently on Netflix by the recommendation of the youth that I work with was Heartstopper. So this is like a little mini short series. I think it has like 1 or 2 seasons, but it is about this openly out gay man who, you know, befriends this person, and then this person kind of questions their sexual orientation a little bit, and they end. I'm not gonna spoil. No spoilers. Wrong and podcast. Then they talk through all of that within the show, and it is really like heartstring pulling, but also really romantic, and you just like want what's best for the characters, and there's a whole slew of different identities and sexual orientations in there, and it's just a really fantastic show. And so I think that youth really like to see representation of people like themselves. You know, it's not just always straight cisgender couples. Like that isn't, you know, we don't want to perceive that that's the norm for everyone, because we know it's not. The other thing is that TV shows, I hope, are kind of on their way to working out not just having like a token gay character, because youth have told me like that's just like the worst, right? Like we didn't want you to throw a character in there with a varying, you know, identity or sexual orientation just because you felt like you had to, you know, make it with the LGBTQ plus crowd. You know, that's not what they want. They want it to be natural. They want it to be this like really organically developed character that has like some realistic, you know, pieces to them. And so I'm hoping that media is kind of trending in that way of like, doesn't need to be straight couples. They don't need to be cisgendered, but it also doesn't need to be like a standalone thing that is showing off, you know, yep, we put a trans or a non-binary character in our show, and so that makes us LGBTQ plus friendly.
When you were talking, it reminded me of a show that isn't that new, but was recommended. I'm on this group of therapists, and sometimes people ask like, does anyone have a good recommendation for a show that has these characters or these themes? And one that came up is Love on the Spectrum, which is really cool. It came up in the context of talking about young adults with autism, and I was like, oh my gosh, the show Love on the Spectrum is so heartwarming, and it's equally, you know, they're showing all kinds of couples, the common thing being all kinds of couples where I think in all cases both persons are on the autism spectrum, and like what dating is like, and it's just, I do recommend it. I'm just gonna go ahead and recommend that show, especially if that sort of identity or diagnosis is of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also, you know, fair to share that in Heartstopper, like there's definitely mental health things happening in that show too. And so, you know, anytime you can relate to a diagnosis or a character like that, I think it feels good for the most part to say, you know what, it's normalization, right? Like people have mental health, you know, diagnoses, they have mental health like symptoms that they deal with. And so to be able to sit here and say like, wow, I'm not the only one. Yes. Thank you. And that feels really good. So definitely, I also love Love on the Spectrum. I think it is an absolutely adorable show for so many people. And I think it's a really great outlet. It gives like a specific chance for individuals that are on the spectrum. They're like, you know what, this is life for me. This is what it's like. Walk with me through it. You know, I get one of those like take a walk in my shoes kind of stories of, you know, this is really what I deal with every day, and this is how I'm gonna proceed and go on a date. Yes. And it's cool.
Yes. All right, we're going to name drop a couple other shows, but because I think we both want to make sure there's some context. So when we were talking, we both have heard people are watching the show Big Mouth. Your thoughts?
It is for a specific age that I would say is probably older. It's, you know, it's for older teens, but, you know, I would say at the same rate, like, kids watch what they want to watch. We're no fools to that. But the show does have some like really important language and acceptance in it. And I think that's the take home for me when I actually watch this myself. And, you know, that's not to say that you should go and watch it right now. Right. You know, this is just like a, hey, if in the future you are interested, or if, you know, a parent is like, yeah, that's cool, we can watch it together. Like whatever that case may be, there's different, sexual orientation is there's different gender identity and the norm of your body and having urges as you grow up, because that is typical in your development. We're talking about your gender expression, your sex assigned at birth, all of these different pieces of you. And it's really cool to see them actually in a TV show
with a voice.
Yeah, that doesn't make it really uncomfortable or weird. Like, it's just a normalized thing in this TV show, and I think that's what makes it really interesting to watch. Of course, there's definitely some inappropriateness with all that is TV. They have their freedom to go wild with it, and they do, especially in this show. So definitely a parental advisory on that one. But it is kind of intriguing. So maybe if it's not something you're going to watch, like, do a little bit of research on it. Research the show, look it up. You can read about it, because I'm sure that there's, kind of press regarding like the stuff they're talking about and how it's probably perceived as controversial, but at the same point, it's actually really important topics.
Yep. Or when in doubt, just tell your health teacher to watch it, and then they can decide maybe some somewhat appropriate clips to share.
I love that. Any health teacher that could talk about gender affirming things in a health class as early as you can is an A+ in my book. Okay. So
yay, health teachers. Okay, last sort of hot topic or something of interest before we get to talk all about what OUT Maine does. Is I went to a training on gender affirming care and was introduced to the genderbread person, which is really hard to talk about without a visual, but you seem to feel comfortable. So would you please tell us about this interesting tool?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you think about everything I'm about to say on a scale, then it kind of sets us up for some success. So we kind of have like 4 different kind of compartments that make us up as a person, right? So we have our sex that was assigned at birth. That is what genitalia we were given, what parts, and the hormones and kind of all that stuff. That's what that aligns with. Then we have our gender expression, which is how we show the world what our gender is. And that doesn't have to match with your sex assigned at birth. And then we also have our gender identity, which is who we are. It's the root of who we are inside. And again, that doesn't have to match our gender expression. It doesn't have to match our sex assigned at birth. And then lastly, we have our sexual orientation. So sexual orientation is who we are attracted to. So has nothing to do with who we are. Well, it is a piece of you, but it's not like your internal sense of self, but it is who you are attracted to. So now let's stick with this attraction piece. When we're talking about attraction, we have sexual attraction. We kind of have a romantic attraction. You might have just a physical attraction. There's so many pieces that make up what you would love about a person. What really makes you start getting palms sweaty, nervousness, whatever that is. And so that's why there's so many sexual orientations, is because we can feel love and lust, or whatever you want to call it, for a bunch of different people. And so that one I think is the hardest to grasp for many folks, because you're like, well, I'm attracted to a boy, right? Well, what is a boy? What is it about the boy that makes them attractive? And so you can break it down. It's like, well, do you like anatomically what they've got going on? That's one part.
Do you like hair? Do you like
do you like facial hair? Do you like the long hair? But do you like the way their voice sounds? I don't know, right? That's one thing. But do you also like their personality, right? And these are things we do on our own automatically, but just knowing you could actually break them down and find out that you might actually not be attracted to that part. You're only attracted to the romantic and emotional piece of that person, and the body just comes with it. And then you're like, oh, this is what I have to like.
Right.
But it turns out that there's so many other options. Because we also know that people who are transgender do not feel like the body that they were given matches their internal sense of self. So you might be attracted to someone that's gender expression is that of a female, but they might not have the parts of a female. And so there's a lot of complexity to this, and I think that youth are way better at it than any people our age and up. And they're really good at being in touch with themselves to say, whoa, there's so many more pieces to this than I think people originally, quote unquote, thought there were going on. Our gender identity does not equal our gender expression. It does not equal our sex assigned at birth. And gender does not equal our sexual orientation. And so all these things exist separately. And that is like the driving point of the genderbread person.
Got it.
To know. And then just know that everything is a spectrum. There's not like one absolute. And there could be people in your life that are like, oh yeah, no, I'm non-binary. And then the next week be like, oh, I actually have found out I traveled down that path and I'm walking back because it didn't feel right. And that's okay.
Yes, normal.
And I love that for them because it means that they tried something that they thought they liked, found out otherwise, and now they feel confident enough to kind of come back and then try again.
Yes. All right, it's time. Let's hear about OUT Maine.
This is my shining moment.
Yes, we're into June now. So what's going on now this summer, year-round, that queer youth can look at?
Yeah, so I hope that people all know what June is. So June is Pride Month, and one of the busiest months here at OUT Maine. We do have things that are kind of going on around the clock here. Especially in the Mid-Coast area, but we've expanded out Southern Maine all the way up to the county. In terms of June, keep an eye out for all the Pride events. Almost, I would say like every city or a city nearby, someone has a Pride event happening. OUT Maine attended, I think, at least 20 Pride events last year. And, there's only so many weekends in June to attend these things, but look for us. We'll be tabling. We'll be out and around. Stop by and say hi. Let us know that you've listened. We're happy to share with you any answers to any questions you might have. And we'll also likely have a lot of Pride flags and pins and pronoun pins and all of the goods. So we'll be happy to see you around the state. But if in June we don't catch up with you, we would love for you to join any of the programming we have to offer. And so we do have weekly online youth groups, and these are all kind of broken up by age. So right now we have 2 different groups that we work with. We have 9 to 13-year-olds on one day, and then we have 13 or 14 to 22, which feels like a really big gap, but it actually blends really, really well because there's folks you can ask questions to who are a couple years older than you. And it's all monitored by our OUT Maine staff. We're on there. Myself and our youth engagement coordinator, Maggie, are always on those groups with everyone. And we have, different presenters come in. But sometimes we just sit there and talk about anime for an hour. It's really going to be dependent on the group. And other times we'll talk about stuff that's hard or stuff that's really happy and exciting. It's a whole lot of a random conversation most of the time. And so you can sign up for those programs right on our website, and you don't also need parent permission. So if you'd like to sign up, all it requires is a safe email for the link to go to. And other than that, you are good to log on and sign in with us and just can't come and chat. You keep your camera off, turn your camera on, just use the chat box, whatever feels good, because we want you to feel comfortable in this space and eventually be able to, keep your camera on and chatting with everyone, but we know it takes time. But if online you're like, absolutely not, that sounds terrible, I'm homeschooled or I spend time on the computer in other ways and I just want to be in person again, I totally hear you. One thing we do over the summer, which sometimes ends up falling in June, but because it's so busy, sometimes it does not, we have something called Out in the Park. These are kind of a series of park-held events that we do all over the state. So I think last year we did Wiscasset and Belfast and Portland, but this year we'll kind of expand out more. So we're covering a bunch of geographic areas, and really it's just a chance to come and hang out at the park. I'll bring popsicles, I'll bring candy, I'll bring popcorn. We did a tie-dye event, all these really fun things going on. And you can again sign up for those as they pop up on our website, but dun dun dun. My favorite event that we hold is our Rainbow Ball weekend. And this happens the last weekend in April every year. If you're listening, make sure you keep an ear out in January, the next January coming up, because January is when we start to put out our registration for this event. And Rainbow Ball is a jam-packed weekend consisting of talent show and workshops. So we have like queer sex ed, we have Maine Family Planning come and do a workshop there. We talk about queerness in media. We talk about writing, poetry, or improv. We play D&D. We play board games. We have an LGBTQ plus prom where you get to go shopping in a closet of donated formal wear and take it home with you. And then by the end of the weekend, everyone's exhausted and doesn't want to leave. And it's absolutely wonderful. And I couldn't speak better about the whole weekend. It's just an absolutely great experience. We do charge, like, it is like a $75 thing, yeah. But if you can't afford that, no biggie. We have scholarships for it, so you just select that, and then you pay nothing, and you get to enjoy this whole weekend overnight up in Jefferson, Maine at Camp Wavis, which is right on the Damariscotta Lake. So it is quite the event.
Wow, one of a kind.
That it is.
The only other thing I had heard about and thought was one of a kind too is Haystack Weekend, which I know probably is about as far away as it can get right now, but you want to talk about that for a sec?
Absolutely. So Haystack is one of our events that we do every other year. So our next year will be September of 2024 that this happens. So by the time y'all are listening, you'll have some time to prep. But what this event is, it's like a huge art-focused weekend. So Haystack, the way it works is you would get nominated by a teacher, or like specifically maybe an art teacher or a person at your school who knows you may be a part of the community or even an ally, and you get to go to Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, which is up in Deer Isle, Maine. We do offer some pickup locations to shuttle you there because Deer Isle is one heck of a drive. It is way out there, but it is absolutely beautiful. And at Haystack, we have you all sign up for these different workshops. So we have metal and woodworking and ceramics and pottery and graphic design and
fiber arts.
Fiber arts, yes. I'm like, all of them are welded. I don't know. They're just like, it's the craziest amount of art options for you. And then you spend the entire weekend working on your project. So I know last year, a bunch of kids made like metal spoons. They like would bend them and do all this stuff with, I don't know. It's just, in this like giant garage where it's like very hot and sweaty, and I was like very cold in the ceramics studio, but we got to paint on our plates and like decorate them and mold everything. Like, it was absolutely phenomenal. Like, people made, and it was just an awesome weekend. And it's right on the water as well, which is absolutely phenomenal. It's in September and it's like the perfect weather and the most amazing food. I have to give them a shout out for their food. It's pretty incredible.
Wow. And it's just for teens. It's just for queer teens and allies.
I know. I luck out because I work there. So that's the key. Volunteer with OUT Maine and you get to go on these really cool things. Yeah.
Good to know. Those sneaky listeners who aren't teens just gotta wait.
Yeah.
Gotta weigh in.
And I should also add that I believe that this is just for juniors and seniors in high school. So I think to keep in mind. But we're trying to add new programs all the time. So if you're like, hey, you never come to this area, what are we doing? Reach out to us, let us know. As soon as we know there's a need, we're there.
Awesome. Well, let me name drop your podcast one more time. Thinking Out, OUT, loud. And where can we find it?
You can find it anywhere that you listen to your podcast. So you can find it on Spotify. You can find it right on our website. And I believe it's on Apple Music. But yeah, anywhere you get your podcasts, you can find us.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for coming on this one.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
Yay!
Thank you so much for listening to this last episode of Season 1 of Not Now, Maybe Later. I want to give some big thank yous for this season. First, to the marketing team of Sweetser Mental Health. Thank you for your support of this new project. To all of my guests, Liz Cunningham on the middle school episode, Mom on the parent episode, Sam Kingsley of Saco Bay Mental Health on the medications episode, Maura Oakes for this episode during June, which is Pride Month, and Brittany for the disclaimer. Also, thank you to my client who volunteered her time for the client episode about anxiety. Thank you again to SuperRAR for the use of their song Dopamine Hits, which you're hearing right now and heard so many times this season. Thank you to the websites Pixabay, Audacity, Anchor. And most especially, thank you to all of my clients, present and past. It is from you that I have learned most about what I should know about teen mental health. Thank you everyone for listening. Please share, like, follow on your favorite listening platforms, and share on your social media. Let's get this info out there. Be well.
So true.